some technical issues. There are a number of people presenting from 3 different local authorities, so we just wanted to make sure everything was working. So good morning and welcome to this Adolescent Safety Learning event. Thank you so much for joining and taking the time to attend this event this morning. My name's Lisa Colombi. I'm the Contextual Safeguarding Coordinator in Wiltshire Council, and I'm just going to be kind of getting things going this morning, but I've got a number of colleagues on the line from Wiltshire, Swindon and Dorset who are also going to be speaking this morning. So we're just going to start off with a little bit of housekeeping as normal. We are going to be recording the session, hopefully, if it works. So it'll be available for colleagues who aren't able to attend. So I hope that's okay with everyone. It looks like we've got some really great attendance today, which is brilliant. I know it said on the front screen, but if people could please pop their name and their role into the chat, that would be really helpful. Just keep us on track with who's attending today. As always with online events, it'd be great if you keep your microphone muted unless you're asking a question. And if you can keep your cameras on so we can see who's in the room, that's brilliant, unless it's causing any technical issues, of course. We do have some time for question and answers at the end. But if you think of something as we go through and you want to pop a question in the chat, that's fine, and we'll get to it towards the end. Or if it's a really burning question, please do use the kind of raise hand function and we'll try to address it as we go through as well. Just to mention as well, we're not going to be sharing any confidential information, but we will be referencing case studies which involve, real young people and families. So we'd ask you to respect confidentiality. And also bear in mind that some things we talk about today might raise issues for you kind of personally or professionally. So please do sort of look after yourself and take time out if you need to. We've got a packed 2 hours today, so there's no formal break, but please do take a comfort break as and when you need to. And lastly, the slides have been sent to you in PDF format for your reference. It should be on the invite or an email that you were sent, and there will be an evaluation form that we're going to ask you to fill in if that's okay. I think there's a link in the chat that's going to be popped in, and it was also on the email that you were sent as well. Okay, so just to give a bit of context, last year, Wiltshire, Swindon and Dorset local authorities submitted a joint bid to the Department for Education for some funding for us to develop some work in the themed areas relating to adolescent safeguarding. So each area has been piloting some really innovative approaches to safeguarding adolescents using a contextual safeguarding evidence base. And this session this morning is to share the learning from this work. And I'm also now really pleased to introduce Catherine Luthwaite from the Department for Education's Tackling Harm Unit, just to say a few words about how the project started. I could come over to you, Catherine.
Thanks, Lisa. And yeah, I'm just going to speak very briefly just to give a bit of context for this work. So yeah, my name's Catherine Luthwaite. I'm from the Department of Education and I work on exploitation and extrafamilial harm. So I've been overseeing the extrafamilial harm regional recovery projects. So the fund was launched last year and we had really huge interest in the strand on safeguarding adolescents from extrafamilial harm, which was fantastic. So we were able to fund 8 projects which brought together over 20 local authorities. So the appetite from local areas to develop their response to these harm types was really clear. So that was really exciting. As Lisa mentioned, we asked areas to focus on 3 key themes, which actually came out of a report by the National Panel on Child Criminal Exploitation, which was called It Was Hard to Escape. So those themes were parental engagement, education as a protective factor, and reachable moments. So all of those will be very familiar to you as, really key areas for developing an effective safeguarding response. And today we're going to hear about work that the South West have done under all 3 of those themes. So for me, overseeing the projects has just been a really fantastic opportunity to kind of learn alongside local areas as they develop their responses, bring together different professionals and develop some really innovative practice in this space. Since the project started, we've obviously had the final recommendations of the care review, which included some recommendations on extrafamilial harm, as well as lots of wider recommendations in the child protection space. DfE is obviously committed to publishing an implementation strategy by the end of this year. So as we look at the extrafamilial harm recommendations, we're really keen to build on the learning and kind of really innovative practice from across the project, but also on the relationships that we've been able to build with local areas. And we're really keen to sort of continue to draw on their expertise and experience as we develop our response to those recommendations and set out our position in that strategy. So I'll just hand back over to Lisa for now, and just really looking forward to hearing more about the projects today. And it's great that so many of you have joined because the work has been really exciting. So hopefully it'll be really interesting for everyone to hear about.
Brilliant. Thanks, Catherine. And thank you for being so supportive throughout the project as well. It's been great. Okay, so I'm just going to move on to the next slide and talk about education as protection. So as you'll be hearing this morning, the 3 different local authorities have undertaken lots of different pilots which have been developed within their local context. And this event is to make sure that we can share that learning between each area, to make sure that that kind of knowledge base around this really important area of work is kind of shared regionally. But the first pilot I'm going to talk about this morning is actually a joint project that we undertook between Wiltshire, Swindon and Dorset. So under the theme of education as protection, we know that school and education can be a really protective factor for young people who are at risk of extrafamilial harm, and that the impact of COVID on education and attendance has really increased vulnerability for a lot of young people. So as a collective, we wanted to explore schools and education settings, knowledge and understanding of extrafamilial harm in the context of their setting, and how those contexts interplay with other contexts children and young people spend their time in and might be at risk. So such as the route to school, the local neighbourhood, or within the setting itself. We wanted to see if kind of dedicated training and support for schools could help them to reduce risk and increase safety for young people. So what we did within this pilot, across the 3 areas, we recruited 1 dedicated contextual safeguarding advisor to work with the settings across the 3 areas over a period of 4 months. And she offered a bespoke training package and support around understanding contextual risks and how to put in place effective interventions for those settings. Whilst being in education is absolutely, for most children, a protective factor for young people, we also want to consider the culture of safety within schools. And if we think back to last summer and the Everyone's Invited website that I'm sure a lot of you have heard about, that gave young people the opportunity to upload their own kind of personal testimonies of experiences of sexual harassment and abuse within their school settings. And what was quite striking about that was many of the schools nationally didn't realise the extent of the problem. And that led to a kind of report from Ofsted, which offer kind of recommendations for schools to ensure that they understand their local issues. So whilst the schools we worked with already had in place safeguarding structures which supported identification of those contextual issues, we also supported them to complete a self-assessment which offered scrutiny of safeguarding arrangements in relation to extrafamilial harm. Okay. So here's just a bit about what we did. Suffice to say, undertaking a project like this across 3 different areas within the timeframes that we had, it did prove a challenge, and we'll come back to those challenges as part of our kind of reflections as we talk about the learning this morning. However, we did have a really fantastic support response to our offer of support across the 3 different regions, and we ended up working with 10 settings across Wiltshire, Swindon and Dorset, and that included 9 secondary schools and 1 alternative provision. So each school received training on contextual safeguarding, which got some really excellent feedback. And then the settings, each of them also sent out surveys for young people, young people, parents and staff to complete. And this was all looking around the school's responses to contextual concerns. So again, there was a really great return rate for that. And the settings have used those responses to inform their self-assessment and their planning for future development. They also all completed a hotspot mapping exercise with young people. So that asked them to map out where in the school students felt safe or unsafe. So just so people know, if you haven't heard of this, it's a really, really great tool that can be used with young people in any kind of physical context. So it might be their local neighbourhood or their route to school, or again within the school itself. So you print out a map and you kind of get them to kind of put green where they feel safe, red where they feel unsafe. It's sort of like that. And what's really interesting when you do that exercise with young people is that often where the young people have highlighted areas that are safe and unsafe, that's very different to what the professionals' views is of where is safe in that area. So it's a really great way to explore young people's views on their safety and kind of really understand it from the young people's perspective. I've had a message to say I'm breaking up. I don't know if anybody else can hear me properly or if I'm breaking up at all.
You're
Okay.
fine for me.
Not for me.
Fine. Okay, hopefully, yeah, there might be just some technical. I shall carry on then. Okay, thank you. So the settings that were completed, all these different exercises, use the outcomes to identify what development and intervention work that they needed locally to ensure that their responses to extrafamilial harm is robust and helps create safe spaces for their students. Okay, so what were we actually using? What were the tools that we used? So the self-assessment that we asked the settings to complete was the Beyond Referrals Toolkit. So this is a toolkit that was developed by Dr. Jenny Lloyd and her team at the University of Durham. And Dr. Lloyd is a key member of the contextual safeguarding research team led by Professor Carleen Furman, and she's completed a lot of research projects within schools in this area. The toolkit itself is freely available. It's on the Contextual Safeguarding Network website, and it asks schools to evaluate their responses to extrafamilial harm in the context of the areas that you can see on the screen there. So looking at systems and structures within the school setting, prevention, identification, response and intervention, and school culture. And although this tool was initially developed for harmful sexual behaviour within schools, it has recently been updated to include wider forms of extrafamilial harm. And lots of the schools that completed this fed back that it was really the most useful part of the project. It was really, really helpful. And as I said, it's totally free, available for all settings to use. So if anybody would want to kind of take a look at that and think about doing it in their setting, if you're from an education setting, then I'd really, really recommend that. Okay, this next slide, I just wanted to give a bit of a snapshot really in terms of the surveys that were undertaken. So this particular survey result was the student survey, and this was a kind of the results from the collective responses from across the 10 different settings. And I guess I just wanted to illustrate that although lots of the respondents fed back quite positive things about how, feelings of safety, you can see that kind of although half have said that they agree that school is a safe place for them, a significant proportion have said that it's not a safe place for them. And I just think that's sort of quite striking and something that we need to consider. And as safeguarding partners, we need to be thinking about why that is and what we can be doing to work together with schools and education provisions to increase those feelings of safety for children and young people. And what's been really great is that schools have really got on board with this agenda, and they're really listening to the voice of the students, but also to the parents and the staff to think about how they respond to extrafamilial harm. Okay, I've just included a bit of feedback here. We got feedback from all the schools, but this is just a kind of example, just to kind of show the sorts of things that schools were thinking about. So as you can see, there's been lots of positive action that this school has undertaken to kind of further strengthen safeguarding processes within their settings. I just wanted to point out, what was the one that I liked? Yeah, adapting the training. So they kind of adapted training to make sure that all staff are kind of trained. And one of the kind of themes that came out was understanding a kind of shared language around some of these issues. So I think that was really helpful as well. And then on this second slide, they talk about the improved multi-agency communications. I think that was a really helpful thing that came out for the schools as well. You can see there in terms of the schools sharing with the local PCSOs, and there were like wider agency mapping meetings that happened that this work supported. They really engaged with the hotspot mapping and found that a really useful exercise. And then at the end there, you can see in terms of the audit, so that's that Beyond Referrals toolkit I was just speaking about. Again, it says potentially the most useful exercise. And it sort of says there, as a senior team with a critical hat on, they report that it was eye-opening to reflect that for a school which considers itself highly effective, how few areas were actually green when they completed that self-assessment tool. So they're going to be using that as they move forward to kind of mould their provision, which was really, really helpful. So challenges and learning. One of the big things that came across in all of our projects, but particularly for the schools, is we were trying to get this work done in quite a tight time frame. And as we'll be aware, there's huge challenges for schools at the moment, and the impact of COVID was still ongoing then. So lots of staff were off in terms of the pastoral and the teaching staff with COVID or kind of COVID related things, as well as dealing with the issues that were coming in with the students as well, due to that kind of ongoing impact. So that did kind of affect the ability of schools to fully engage with the process at times, which is totally understandable. Another thing that some of the schools raised was system-wide challenges. So although they were kind of getting on board with doing this work, for example, one school talked about identifying a peer group where the concerns were around the peer group, but they're still unable to kind of refer that peer group in as a group into a front door or multi-agency safeguarding hub because the system and structures at the moment aren't set up to do that. The shared language that I've kind of talked about already. It's kind of a bit of a challenge in some ways, but it also was really helped. It was developed within this project, which was really, really helpful across the multi-agency partnership. All the schools, as I said, really found the self-assessment tool very helpful, and the networking opportunities of doing an exercise like this was really great. There was lots of kind of unintended positive outcomes from the schools from the different areas talking about these issues, and that kind of led to some interesting developments as well. And I guess the biggest thing is that it gave a spotlight and focus on extra familial harm for the settings. And although within this project we obviously put a lot of resource in and time to support in the schools, this is definitely something that schools can do on their own with the self-assessment toolkit, and I'm sure the different local authorities would be available to support if there was any kind of guidance if any other setting wanted to try doing this. Okay, that was the kind of end of the shared project that we did around schools across the 3 areas. We're now going to move on to look at the kind of more distinct projects that each local area did, and we are going to start with Wiltshire. So you get to hear me talking for a little bit longer, but I will be handing over to people soon, I promise. Okay, so for Wiltshire, just to get a little bit of background and context around contextual safeguarding in Wiltshire. So we have been working with the contextual safeguarding team and Professor Carleen Furman for the past 3 years as part of the Scale Up project. So we in 2019 were selected to be part of that, and we have found it very, very helpful to work with the team to get a lot of support to think about how we embed our contextual safeguarding approach, both at a kind of a strategic and operational level to achieve real system change. So some brief highlights I just wanted to kind of flag here was our child protection risk outside the home pilot. So alongside Wiltshire's family-led review of child protection, we have been piloting an innovative child protection pathway for children at significant risk of harm outside the home. So with the support from the Department for Education, we've been testing a 5th category of harm, which we've called ROTH, risk outside the home. And this is within an approach to child protection conferencing and planning, which recognises risk and harm in contexts and also works really closely with parents as kind of primary safeguarders of their children. At the moment, we're the only local authority in the country piloting this approach in terms of the child protection approach, and we're really pleased to have been invited to partner with the contextual safeguarding team for a further period of research, and this will see other local authorities also trial this approach with the aim of findings informing, potential revisions to statutory guidance. As Catherine was mentioning earlier, that question was posed in the care review, and we're hoping that the work that we're doing alongside colleagues in other areas will play an integral part in kind of answering that question about whether an alternative pathway is needed. We've also developed a number of different areas of work that I'll touch on very briefly. We had been doing a lot of work in schools previously, supporting schools with mapping out concerns around exploitation specifically, which has been quite helpful. We've also had a contextual safeguarding coordinator role, which isn't myself, that's kind of had the kind of capacity to drive a lot of this work forward. We've developed our risk outside the home pathway, and this has included launching a new assessment tool which focuses on risk outside the home. And we've brought this in to replace our previous child sexual exploitation screening tool. And it really takes a holistic approach to identifying extrafamilial harm and also includes the ability to refer places and spaces into our specialist service, which is the Emerald team. We've also developed some meeting structures called Safe for Young People, and these really adopt a contextual approach and oversee assessment and plans for context, and I'm going to speak about them again in a moment. Okay, so going back to the themed areas that Catherine mentioned, where risk is coming from outside of the home and isn't always attributable to the parent and the carer, it's really vital that safeguarding networks engage with parents as people that know their child best. But we know that there can be some tension with this. So under the theme of families and engaging parents, we looked at some work to try and kind of see how we could support parents. Initially, we were thinking about setting up a peer support network for families. This has evolved into a really exciting pilot where we set up a parent mentoring program. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleagues Sue Nash and Holly Harwood to tell you a little bit more about that. If you can take control, guys, hopefully.
Thank you, Lisa. Hopefully I've taken control.
Good
morning, everyone. My name's Sue Nash and I manage volunteers within the Wiltshire Youth Offending Team and our wider young people service. So have you got control or have I got control? It won't move.
You should do, Sue, but I can take it back and try and move the slides for you. Should I try and do that?
Yeah, that would be really helpful. Thank you.
No problem. Okay. There we go.
So just a bit of background, really. We are quite experienced we have 2 mentoring schemes for children and young people already. And this was an idea that I had probably in excess of 3 years now of originally looking at parents of our young people that are involved in the youth offending team, and realising that our workers were spending quite a lot of time supporting parents as well as trying to do their direct work with young people. So this idea could work across all different services. So we were in a young people's service meeting one day, and Lisa was talking about the work she's been doing, and she said we really need to do something with parents. And I'm like, here's my business case. So it was already there and ready to go. So that's how it came to be, really. If we have the next slide, and I'll hand over to Holly.
Hello, everyone. So if I just briefly explain what the parent mentors do. So we have, so they are volunteers, but they've been trained and DBS checked, and they meet with the parents. So it's parents of children where there's a risk of exploitation or there is exploitation. So primarily we've been focusing on the referrals have come from the youth offending team or the Emerald team. We have had other inquiries, so that's something we could probably develop. But so the parent mentors meet for about an hour once a week, and they are there just to have somebody to talk to, offer a different perspective, helping parents to come up with their own solutions. So it's not parenting, it's more sort of to give them that outlet and that sort of safe space to vent and to encourage them with engaging and, you know, so yeah, it's really exciting, and it's been very fast, and with I don't want to sort of over talk before the next slide, so I'll hand back to Sue, but obviously you can ask questions at the end.
Thanks, Holly. Can we have the next slide, Lisa?
Hang on, that's probably my fault. Oh, there we go. It should work. Oh,
now we've lost it altogether.
Okay, no problem. We can bring it back.
I don't know how that.
We knew there would be some technical difficulty with doing it across the 3 different areas.
That's fine. I can carry on talking while you get it back.
You can do that, Sue.
So what have we done? Because we already have a lot of volunteers that undertake a lot of different roles within our service, because of the short timescales, we actually, first of all, went to our existing volunteers and said, look, this is an exciting opportunity. Is anybody interested? And actually 10 volunteers came back to us straight away and showed an interest. So we did quite a lot of training. We did 2 sessions with PACE, which is the Parents Against Child Exploitation, who were absolutely amazing, especially with our volunteers being able to hear the experience of one parent. And particularly the biggest message I think that came across through that was how parents feel judged. And the opportunity to have somebody to vent to where they didn't feel judged was really, really important to them. I think naively, we were quite naive. We thought, because we're so experienced with mentoring schemes for children and young people, we can, use our existing paperwork and adapt it for adults, which we did, and we'll come back to that and some feedback we had. So we promoted the scheme to our service, and we started receiving referrals, and our first match was completed in February this year. To date, I think we might now have 8 matches. And 2 of which are now coming to an end, and we're able to get some feedback. Can we have the next slide, Lisa? Back to Holly.
Thank you. Yeah, I won't take control this time because I don't want to close it again. So yeah, this is just a bit of feedback about what's gone well so far. I think the main thing that we've found is that parents have been so enthusiastic about having that support, and having somebody that is there for them. Obviously it's really important for people to be there for the young people, but the parents, in terms of they are safeguarding the children most of the time. So that's been really good. And We've had professional social workers in the Emerald team saying that parents have been more confident in their SIN meetings, and that we've had safeguarding concerns that have come up, so we've been able to intervene earlier than maybe if it had been left to the next day. And yeah, so I mean, there's lots on there, but basically the really good thing is that it's sort of inspiring parents. They're sort of talking about supporting each other and having a support network. And also they've been giving us feedback about where we can improve and how we can adapt our paperwork to be more adult friendly. And then we've had parents that have had lived experiences where, they've been through the system and they're out the other side and they're wanting to give back, which is amazing. And then parents asking for mentors to attend meetings with them, which, is something that we didn't actually think would happen, but it's been a really, really good thing. So, yeah, I'll pass back to Sue.
Thanks. Next slide. Thank you. So there were a lot of challenges. It can be difficult matching children and young people with mentors and trying to, get a time where you can see the young person with the mentor and their parent or carer and us. So that was always a difficult challenge anyway. But what we found was matching adults was even more challenging, because you have to factor in things like, their work commitments and, often changing shifts and things like that. So that was a real challenge in sort of getting it going, especially within the timescales that we have. Interesting, we had both parents were referred, and that caused us quite a dilemma, because actually we only had one parent mentor available in that area. So we had lots of discussions whether that parent mentor could actually mentor both parents, but at separate times. And we decided we'd give it a go, and so far it's worked really well. We've had to, think about adult safeguarding as well, how that is different from children's safeguarding, and had to sort of do additional training on that for our volunteers. Paperwork, getting evidence of the outcomes, and that was one thing that we did get fed back on. So we used a sort of questionnaire. So we always do an evaluation at the end of mentoring, but what we want to know is how that person's journey has been and the distance they've travelled. So with our children and young people, we use various tools to get information from the beginning, review it in the middle, and then do it again at the end to show the improvements under different headings. So our first parent that we matched refused to fill it in, didn't like it whatsoever, and interestingly decided that she wanted to rewrite it for us, which is great. We involved our volunteers in a lot of the decision making as we were setting up the project. So it was really good that actually we were starting to involve parents in that as well. We did have some inappropriate referrals where they thought that the parent mentor could help with the children's managing children's behaviour and things like that. So we've had to deal with some of those. It's always a challenge having a mentor in the right geographical area, with Wiltshire being sort of a large rural county. And as we keep saying, that the limited time that and the funding stream was a real challenge for us. And also, as I said before, the training that PACE did for us, and the key message about parents being feeling judged by professionals. Sadly, that is something that we're still coming up with, but we have now done some, PACE have done some training for the professionals within our service, which is really good. Can we have the next slide, please? Holly?
Right. Yeah, last one for us. So this is just some of the feedback from, what we do is we do a review every 4 to 6 weeks, and then we do one at the end. So we've got 2 due to end actually, and then we've got some new referrals coming in. So this is just some of the feedback, and I think really it just highlights that the parents are not feeling like they have to be perfect or censored. They're able to just vent, and actually the parent mentors have been brilliant in, you know, offering a different perspective and, you know, saying, is that a perception or is that actually how things are? And actually that's helping sort of bridging those gaps of parents engaging. And yeah, and a lot of the families are feeling embarrassed about what's going on, and they don't want to they don't either want to talk to their family or they haven't got family near them, and it's just really helping them. We've got a couple of parents that are quite isolated, and it's actually getting them out the house, and yeah, it's just been really positive so far. So yeah, that's all of our slides, so I'll pass back to Lisa.
Thanks, Holly and Sue. That's great. Yeah, I just wanted to say in terms of the projects in Wiltshire, I think this has been a really positive one, and we are going to be continuing with this scheme. We've identified some different funding to keep it going for a bit longer, because we did recognise, as you've been sharing, that it takes a lot of time and investment to kind of get this kind of going with parents and kind of build on those relationships as well. And we are going to be working towards that kind of peer group mentoring, that we talked about in terms of our initial idea for the project. But it's just recognising that will take some time. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and hopefully people found that helpful to hear about it. And if anyone is thinking of setting up something similar, I'm sure if there's any queries or questions at the end or even after this event, then Sue and Holly would be really pleased to address those. So thank you. Okay, so thank you. I'm going to move on now, a little bit more talking from me before I hand over to some other colleagues. So the next kind of themed area that we looked at in Wiltshire is around reachable, teachable moments. So those opportunities to engage young people at kind of specific times. Our initial plan in this area, through our youth offending team work, we'd already been piloting a bit of a kind of new way of working, where if a young person was in police custody and there were concerns around exploitation, usually criminal exploitation, but other forms of exploitation as well, one of our youth offending team colleagues would go and see the young person in custody and kind of talk to them, and then follow up any kind of things that came out of that in terms of safeguarding concerns whilst they were in police custody. So initially we wanted to try and upscale that and make that available out of hours, because we were aware that we were potentially missing young people who were coming through custody out of normal working hours. However, we did have some challenges with that, and it was around being able to recruit support workers that would have that availability within the short timescale that we had. So we changed tact a little bit, and we decided to think about what intervention we could offer to those young people that had that moment within custody, and what we started to think about, if I just move on to the next slide, which might explain it a little bit more. I talked a little bit about our Safe for Young People context meetings. So what we found was we identified young people who had been through custody. So we were getting custody records sent to us from our police colleagues. So we had a list of young people, and we identified cohorts of young people from that list that were actually associated with each other. And then we could offer a kind of group work intervention. And we did this because we recognise that kind of peer groups as a context, they can be where young people can experience harm, and actually it might be effective to try and put something in place that kind of responds to that. So that fitted in really nicely with our kind of Safe for Young People context meeting approach. So I'm just going to talk very briefly about what that is. So as you can see here, as part of our Risk Outside the Home pathway, we instigate these context meetings when concerns are raised about places and spaces. So that might be a location or a peer group. This is our kind of operational response to providing that multi-agency oversight of when there's concerns that are contextual, specifically to do with groups and locations, as I said. They're multi-agency meetings, they facilitate information sharing, we formulate an analysis of what the concerns are and what the strengths are, and we oversee context assessments and context plans within them. We've really been trying to kind of include non-traditional safeguarding partners who are people that have got responsibility for or a reach into these places and spaces where young people might be at risk, that might traditionally not be included in kind of safeguarding meetings. So we had this kind of structure set up anyway. So the cohorts that we identified for this pilot, one was around this first context A, where there had been two groups of young people that had been involved in quite a violent incident in a public space. And that had led to obviously involvement in terms of children's services and youth offending teams. And the sorts of concerns we had there were around criminal exploitation, drug misuse, and youth violence. The second cohort that we identified was centred around a large group of young people who were causing quite high-level antisocial behaviour, a group of up to 30 young people. And this had been really escalating in terms of violence and had led to an assault on an emergency worker. It was a police officer. So by identifying these cohorts, we discussed them within our Safer Young People meetings to kind of analyse what those contextual dynamics were, and that helped us kind of lead to a deeper understanding of what those issues were. So, for example, the violence and the antisocial behaviour, what was going on behind them, what was happening within those peer groups. And we then designed bespoke group work sessions for each group. So I was hoping one of my colleagues who ran the groups would be here to talk to you about this morning, but she's had to go and deal with some issues for her young people, which I'm sure you'll understand. So I'm going to attempt to feed it back a little bit as well. So in terms of what they did, the writing there is quite small, apologies, but it's just some information about the sorts of planning that took place in terms of the group sessions. So that was informed by our kind of initial assessment of the groups. But what we did was, as we worked with the young people kind of set the agenda themselves. So they started talking about, things that matter to them, what was important in terms of what we were trying to do with them in the group. So they kind of set the agenda in terms of the things that were covered in the sessions in the end. So you can see there that, obviously there's things about, experience of police custody, antisocial behaviour and offending behaviour, exploitation, knife crime. Those were the sorts of general themes, but the young people really did lead the kind of conversations and helped us think about what we could be doing to kind of support them further and make it that kind of teachable moment, so that they don't obviously end up finding themselves either in police cell or obviously coming to harm in terms of risk outside the home. In terms of kind of what went well, there's some kind of points there, but you can see here from the feedback we received, the group work sessions being flexible and responsive was really, really helpful. We were able to gain the young people's views and consider what mattered to them. We also focused on building safety through building on their strengths and supporting the young people to identify their strengths and interests. So it wasn't all about, you've gone through police custody, we need to reduce the risk. It was really thinking about what would make things safer for them, what would build on their strengths. And by adopting this approach, we found that it really improved multi-agency working. So these group work sessions were overseen by our Safer Young People context meetings, which were these multi-agency meetings that I talked about. And it really did help the network understand more deeply, I suppose, the contextual issues. So things like peer group dynamics. So for example, in terms of one of the groups around the antisocial behaviour, there was a kind of initial assessment within the group, which was quite heavily led by our police colleagues who were interacting with these young people on a daily basis, and also our youth offending team colleagues. And there was a bit of an assessment of who were the kind of ringleaders of the group. And we did try and kind of focus our intervention on the kind of top young people that were seen to be having an influence on the others. And what was really interesting in terms of the group sessions, which we then fed back to the Safer Young People meeting as we went through the process, is that the kind of initial analysis of who was the ringleaders and who had this influence was absolutely the wrong way round. And by kind of working with the young people and seeing them in that different context and understanding their dynamics and engaging with them in that different way, we were able to kind of change the intervention that was needed, and it was really informed by what was actually going on for the young people. So that was really, really, really helpful. And we got some really good feedback from not only our police colleagues, but some other colleagues as well around how that process helped them as well. In terms of challenges, so initially we did have some challenges in terms of the parents not really being sure about a kind of group work approach when their children had been through custody, or they had some concerns around safeguarding as well. So they weren't quite sure, but as I'll talk about in the outcomes as well, there's some really positive outcomes coming from that approach, and they were very, very positive about it in the end. We did have some issues with the young people's friendship groups. As always, if you do group work, you'll understand this. We tried to make it structured and obviously had these 6 young people in one group that we kind of focused on. And we found that kind of 15 to 20 of their friends were turning up to the sessions wanting to join in. We really wanted to kind of engage them as well and take that opportunity, but it was a bit of a challenge in terms of how to manage that and make sure that we were doing it kind of safely and appropriately for the young people. But it did also illustrate the need for this sort of work, and that is going to kind of inform our future planning in terms of how we deliver intervention for young people in this space. And we also just picked up on the fact that in terms of gaining young people's feedback, although we had some really brilliant conversations, we want to kind of think about more creative ways, I suppose, to kind of get the young people's voices heard. Okay, so just in terms of outcomes then, as I kind of summarise shortly. So one of the really striking things within this work is that for one group of young people, they were able to speak about things that had happened to them and things that had led to the incident, which led to them coming into police custody. And for this group of young people, it was racist incidents that they experienced at school and in their local community. And they talked about that and how they felt treated by the system. And they sort of said it was the kind of first time they'd ever had a chance to speak about it in that way, which was really helpful. Doing the group work actually, it contributed to the decision of the court in the end, because these young people, it was, for a lot of them, it was their first offences. It started off as quite a serious offence, but because we did this group work with them at the same time as the kind of court process that was going on, that was fed back to the court, and the court were really happy and impressed with what the young people had done as part of that, and made the decision to refer the case back for an out of court disposal, which meant that for the majority of the young people, I think it was all of them actually, they avoided being kind of unnecessarily criminalised and actually were offered an out of court disposal, which meant that they still engaged with and undertook work related to that offending, but it meant that they didn't end up with a kind of higher level conviction that was perhaps necessary. In terms of our group around antisocial behaviour, there has been a reduction in antisocial behaviour and young people coming to notice of the police in that area, which is really brilliant. The young people engaged really well and kind of had that opportunity to receive kind of early intervention support within that kind of group setting. We got really good feedback, as I said, from the different agencies regarding the group work, and within the group work itself, any kind of issues that were being raised by the young people, such as education, we were able to follow that up. So although it was kind of framed in the kind of reachable moments, there has been a lot of kind of follow up in terms of what's been offered to the young people in terms of those outcomes. And just lastly on this session, just wanted to share again a bit of specific feedback that young people gave, which I've kind of talked about. But like I said, they sort of felt like they were given this space to talk about stuff that they'd never been encouraged to talk about before. And if I'm being totally honest, I guess when a few of the young people brought up an issue around race, some of our workers maybe weren't 100% sure how to kind of respond to that. So we talked about it, and we were like, just the opportunity to give young people space is helpful as a kind of starting point. And so that's what we did. And the young people were really, really positive about that. And there were other things that came from that we're going to be following up as well. And there's some just examples of some of the artwork that the young people gave. So we kind of used kind of graffiti artists and got some other kind of specialists in to kind of provide different activities for the young people. And some of the young people who produced that artwork that you can see there, I mean, if you heard how, you know, they had been spoken about in terms of the issues they were causing in the community and some of the things that we'd actually seen on video, what they were doing in this group work session, they were like, you know, the most committed young people. They were really engaged, properly on board with it. They were getting annoyed when their friends were coming in trying to do it not properly. So it really just shows that if you offer that kind of the correct level of intervention for young people, it can just absolutely bring out the best in them and hopefully make a real impact in terms of their future as well. Okay, so I think that is the end of Wiltshire's feedback. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me. I'm now going to hand over to my colleagues in Dorset. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. So I'm going to try the take control button and hope that it works. So that can I move this on? Well, we'll find out shortly, won't we? So Simon Fraser-Brown, I'm the Service Manager for Young and Thriving in Dorset. So I've got a strategic lead responsibility for contextual safeguarding, and I'll be joined by my colleagues Tina Ironside, who's one of our strategic commissioners, and Michael Potchin, who is our Project and Policy Officer. So I'm just going to give us a couple of slides just by way of introduction. So now I have moved that, and it doesn't look as though I am on the next slide. Has that moved for everybody now? Yeah, okay, that worked. Okay, we're in business. Okay, thank you. So a little bit about our contextual safeguarding approach, because I think it's really crucial with this project work that people understand that obviously all local authorities are already quite well invested in contextual safeguarding and exploitation. This has been around for a while, so we've got existing systems, mechanisms, etc. in place, and this work was really about where are those opportunities to enhance that, what have we not been able to do that we recognise is something we would like to improve. So helpful just to understand our context, where we are at the moment, but also why our projects were the ones that we focused in on. So a little bit about Dorset. We've got an existing contextual safeguarding framework which we've invested in heavily, and that's been supported by a rollout of training across children's services to social care and early help and staff. That's been then supplemented with a further rollout across our voluntary and community sector, multiple sessions offered to them, and also in-school sessions offered on the same framework from our targeted youth workers. So kind of quite well invested in that, making sure that everybody knows and understands this agenda. We have a strategic lead in each locality, which is our targeted youth worker around contextual safeguarding. They are kind of regarded as our sort of fount of all knowledge. So they do a lot of their build up and networking, understanding of how peer groups are interacting with one another. And they also share across localities. We know that some of our young people move about and there are concerns of young people coming from one locality into another. So we kind of make sure that they're well networked. Each locality has a youth at risk meeting, which is chaired by the targeted youth worker, and that's an early help mechanism for identifying both individuals and peer groups of concern, those at emerging risk, but also understanding individual contexts that we might be concerned about. So are there particular locations that young people are congregating at? Are there particular spikes in certain schools or certain education settings? Those contexts could also be electronic as well. So it's about just sharing and collaborating with one another to make sure that we've got the right information. We've also got what's called our harbour team. That's our kind of intensive support for some of our most vulnerable young people, those young people we know are being exploited or at high risk of exploitation. And that's a very intensive, high support model of social care, making sure that we try and stabilise our foster care placements wherever we're able to, making sure we're providing high level support to prevent children's home breakdowns and placement breakdowns, etc. And then the last kind of piece of the puzzle here is our child exploitation champions network. So each service, each team within the local authority has a designated child exploitation champion, so we can cascade information up and down our networks, but also identify where things are not working, where the system's not necessarily joining up, so we can kind of coordinate our efforts a bit better. So our three projects, very briefly, are we identified that we needed to work more closely with mainstream schools and provide alternative provision to increase understanding of risk, particularly where young people were either on fixed term or permanent exclusions, but also where we were commissioning alternative provision as part of a wider timetable. And we needed a mechanism for AP providers to really assess and understand the risks for themselves, so that they were in a place to kind of plan for that, and also that schools had confidence that wherever they were sending somebody would be a suitable placement. And we also recognised that group work interventions, relationship-based practice, was really key in terms of encouraging young people to change behaviours and to support re-engagement for those that were at risk. So I'm going to hand over my slides to Michael Potchin and Tina and leave you in their capable hands.
Thank you, Simon. This is Tina Ironside. Hopefully you can see my slides. Have I just moved on? Yep.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful, thank you. So in Dorset, we have a framework of contracted providers that deliver alternative provision, and as well as us, schools use that framework as well. So we used this project and this funding to create some tools to support schools who place children in AP, to help them with assessing the risks, and also for AP providers for them to reduce the risks of EFH. So I'm just going to talk you through the two sets of resources really that we've created for these. So in terms of developing the toolkit, how we got started, we had a couple of months of undertaking research, consultation and testing to develop particularly the AP, the school's AP toolkit. And that was looking at national guidance and reviews, and also local consultation with colleagues, other local authorities in our area, AP providers, just a small selection of AP providers, and some schools as well. I'm going to hand over to my colleague Michael now, who pulled all this research and consultation together to develop and publish the toolkit. Okay, Michael.
Thanks, Tina. I'm just going to take control and see if I'm, I should be able to move things on from there. That's great. Good morning, everyone. I'm Michael Potchin, Project and Policy Officer with Children's Services at Dorset Council. The toolkit, as you see there, assists schools in their commissioning of alternative provision for pupils who are temporarily excluded from or otherwise unable to attend the school. And it has three aims: to increase the safety of children and young people who are at risk by encouraging outcomes-based commissioning of alternative provision, to enable schools and providers to engage effectively with children and families, but beyond that with children's services and multi-agency safeguarding partners, and to strengthen the data framework for alternative provision. So those are the aims. And just moving on, that worked, that's wonderful. So just a very brief sort of overview of the toolkit. Firstly, the background information. This focuses on the specification from the recent framework tender for alternative provision that Tina and colleagues organised. Then some thoughts about identifying with young people and their families, but also introducing the local contextual safeguarding system and resources that Simon outlined, so that schools are aware of those from the outset and can include them in their planning, rather than just sort of catching up at the last minute when maybe they've already taken a decision about sending the child to an off-site alternative provision. Then some guidance on commissioning alternative provision. And I'll say a bit more about that when we come to that slide. And finally, a section on quality assurance. How can schools ensure that the alternative provision that they have commissioned is doing what they wanted it to and is of a high standard? As we launch the toolkit today, it's a pilot phase which will run till the autumn, and during that time we'll be developing a further section on evaluating and monitoring outcomes. So that's work that we've yet to take forward. So to look at each of those sections in a bit more detail, the first section includes the alternative provision tender specification, which explains what we require from providers. Then there's the safeguarding audit that they must complete each year, and a health and safety audit, similarly, they must complete each year. And the idea of this is to give schools confidence that Dorset Council has already carried out a good level of due diligence for the providers who are on our framework. That doesn't mean it's all done for schools. The responsibility to check that the provider is right for their child and can meet their specific educational and safeguarding outcomes remains with the school, but there is that good foundational level of due diligence already in place, so it builds confidence. Secondly, identifying the need and engaging the family, really encouraging child-centered approaches, not that sort of settings-based approach so much of can they be in school, they need to be somewhere else, but actually thinking about what does the child need. And so that section starts with some feedback that Tina and colleagues received about alternative provision when putting the framework together. And very briefly, that feedback was that the alternative provision services themselves were very good, but that accessing alternative provision was really, really difficult. And that's something that I think we've learned from developing this toolkit and will feed into the new alternative provision framework. And it introduces the contextual safeguarding pathway that Simon outlined. So giving schools that awareness, they know about it already, and they can perhaps respond then more flexibly to emerging contextual safeguarding needs. Choosing and commissioning alternative provision, there's quite a few items there. I'm not going to run through all of them. You can read those at your leisure. I think the key sort of finding for us was that it's really important that schools have a strategy in place for commissioning alternative provision, and that there is strong leadership in place at schools. So there's a named person who's always responsible for commissioning alternative provision, identifying emerging needs, how they're going to be met. That might actually be bringing a provider into school, doesn't have to be about settings. So that strategic, well-led approach is at the heart of section 3. Then we have a section on quality assurance monitoring and outcomes. And the second item there's a really good quality assurance monitoring form that one of the schools that we've worked with has contributed to the toolkit. And I think that could be a very, very helpful tool going forwards. And then the final section, as I say, that we're going to work on during the pilot phase is really looking at outcomes in more detail. How can schools be sure that they're getting not just the safeguarding outcomes that they want, but also that the child is getting educational outcomes that will enable them to return to their main school at the end of the alternative provision episode and be in a place where they can settle back into that school, being broadly in line with where their fellow pupils are at in terms of education as well. So that's the section that we've yet to write in the next few months. So first of all, just to say that Tina has put the toolkit address in the chat bar, and it's also on the slide that you can see there. So do please go and have a look at it. Our business support colleague Mickey has just this morning finished putting in all the links and everything. So it really is hot off the press. Do please go and have a look around. So the toolkit is there now. And we welcome feedback. There is a link on the overview page for the toolkit for feedback. Please, if you're looking at the toolkit, using the toolkit, do send in feedback. We'll use it to improve the toolkit further. At the end of the pilot phase, there'll be a formal launch to Dorset schools after October 2022 half term. And then we'll continue to revise and update the toolkit. It needs to be a living document. So I think that's everything from me, and I'm going to hand back, I think, to Tina.
Yep, thank you very much, Michael. And just updating you on the second element that we also have created. This project came at a really good time for us because, as I mentioned at the beginning, we're developing a new AP framework from September, and these resources that we've created will underpin that. So we've included a new section of an annual safeguarding audit that we send to all alternative provision providers each year, and it's specifically about EFH. This is just a snapshot there of the actual audit tool, but it's got many questions in it, covering a range of safeguarding questions to evidence that they've got good safeguarding practice. So providers on the new framework will be sent a link to complete this audit. And the purpose of the new EFH section is to get a baseline of their current understanding and also hear what they currently do to prevent risks. We link to guidance within the toolkit for contextual safeguarding and EFH, and that will help them develop their understanding as further, and it would also this subject would also be a key focus for us when we monitor our contracts with AP providers over the coming year. So it will be a key topic that we'll be discussing and exploring with them, and also learning from them. As a part of that, we hope to identify providers that are already tackling the risks really well and working with Simon's team around this issue, and use them as case studies so that other providers can learn from them. I'm finished with that section now, and I'm going to hand over to Simon, who will tell you about the other project this funding supported in Dorset.
Thank you, Tina. I'm just taking control again. I'm just going to double check that this works. It's like a giant electronic relay, this presentation. So, and apologies if I'm leaning forward, it's partly because when you take control, the screen, which is already quite small, shrinks even further. So I'm having to lean in. I have got the presentation to my left on a second screen. So if I look left, I promise you I am paying attention. A little bit more about our delivery of group work. So we delivered 3 different group work projects looking at how we can do direct work with young people, relationship-based work with young people to reduce risk. And some of the origins of this work came from our Youth at Risk meeting, because we were discussing young people that we were concerned about. We had a sort of limited range of interventions. So those interventions were largely limited to some additional pastoral pastoral support in school. If there were particular locations or particular individuals, adults that we were concerned about, we could look at some police disruption. And then the third option that we were largely involved in was deployment of detached and outreach youth work. So that the youth workers would know that there's a particular concern location, and that they would try and include that in their rounds around doing detached and outreach youth work. What we felt was missing was that piece of work that would allow us to intervene with a group of young people over a period of time, build the kind of relationship that we needed in order to kind of prevent them from becoming involved in that in any risks, and start to kind of give them the skill set to avoid risks escalating. So recognizing that the limitations of detached youth work and moving it into a kind of more longer term relationship based approach. So we delivered 3 group work programs, as I said. We worked with what's called our Chesil Hidden Girls project. It's now been renamed the Pineapple Project, and I'll talk about that a little bit further on. This was a peer group of 5 young year 10s from one school involved in disruptive behaviour, risk of exclusion from school. Also came about as a result of some wider concerns that we had around violence against young women that we were concerned about, particularly in our Chesil area, and that's been validated by our recent meeting with our Strategic Alliance, which is our governance body for our Children and Young People's Plan, at which the police highlighted a 50% increase in sexual violence against young women in the Weymouth and Portland area. So the youth workers were kind of well ahead of this and knew anecdotally that was the case. In West Dorset, we worked with a group of 4 young men who were coming from a background of being at risk of exploitation and involved in antisocial behaviour. Not dissimilar in North Dorset, 6 young people, 5 of whom were not necessarily meeting the statutory threshold for social care, but also with parents that were unwilling to engage with early help, but they were willing to accept an extension of the pastoral offer from school. So we were able to work our relationship with our school in a way that used education as protection to do that, and to kind of get the young people engaged, even if the families weren't willing to engage in wider family work. One of the group was subject to a child protection plan. So in terms of what we did, our Chesil Hidden Girls, we did a residential with the oh, I think I've missed a slide. Apologies, folks. Did I miss a slide? Yeah, okay, I did miss a slide. So in terms of what we did, so the Chesil Hidden Girls group did a residential. They co-produced some elements of our Hidden Girls work to make sure that Weymouth Town Centre was safer for young women. They've done some work on a survey and producing some publicity materials. With our West Dorset group, they did an away day, not residential, but during the school holidays, in which they attended a bushcraft school where they learned responsibilities around using tools, survival skills, team working, and then prepared a forest food meal, which included bread making. And in North Dorset, we did a programme that ran over 3 sessions, 3 consecutive weeks for the 6 young people. First 2 were delivered in school, exploring risks, feelings of risk and safety. So 4 of the young people had already been discussed at our Youth at Risk meeting. Sorry, that's the acronym there. And the final session was again at an outdoor education centre, looking at leadership skills, team building, developing self-esteem and relationship-based practice. And then in terms of the outcomes, so one of the things that we've learned from our Chesil Hidden Girls project is just how many young women have experienced harm outside the home and how much this is underreported, but also looking at that as an opportunity to learn about how we might change this going forward. We're also learning how to engage those young women on that subject, but also the importance of engaging young men on that subject as well. So the feedback from the young people is that we need changes to PSHE, presence of police in a positive way within schools, and so on. Okay, with our West Dorset work. So with the group as a whole, we saw increased self-confidence, self-esteem, as you might expect. We found that they're more able to problem solve and that they're more resilient, and improved ability to work with their peers. The improved relationship with the targeted youth worker has been really helpful, because when they're then encountering the youth worker when they are out on detached work, they're able to have a meaningful conversation, able to move them away from situations of risk, able to continue that relationship. In terms of specifics, so we had one young person who was at emerging risk of exploitation, who is now subsequently enrolled in college, engaging with a maths and English tutor, and is no longer considered an exploitation risk. The second young person has been able to maintain their place at a learning centre or pupil referral unit, and that was a significant risk or significant concern that that placement would break down, that they would be removed from that learning centre. The other young person C, was on an out-of-court disposal order, but we've now found that they've been engaged with some of the services that we needed them to be engaged with, including CAMS and their school inclusion lead, which is around addressing their attendance. And then the last young person remains engaged with support services and is working towards an outdoor instruction is working towards attending an outdoor instruction program after completing his school education. So actually kind of starting to learn new skills that they can apply usefully going forward. Okay. If I move on to the next slide, in our North Dorset group, 5 of the 6 young people completed a post-programme evaluation. All of them stated that they felt more aware of risk outside of the home. Again, but develop relationships in an extra familial setting. So being able to work with the young people in the school and the community, and they've continue to see the young people on a one-to-one basis in school, but are also able to have those conversations when they encounter them in a detached youth work setting. One of the young person that was on the child protection level has moved down to early help level because the concerns around their safety have de-escalated, so we're feeling more confident that they're safe. And another young person has engaged with the SWIFT programme in Wiltshire. So this particular programme was done with a group of young people that attend a school on the Dorset-Wiltshire border, and this particular young person lived within the Wiltshire area. So we've been able to get them engaged in additional help. So again, if I move on to the next slide. So some of our lessons learned, we recognise the value of pre-meeting young people to explain the purposes of work. Sometimes the schools were a little bit, well, you're going to go and do this, and not really telling the young people. And that made it a little bit harder to get them engaged. They didn't really know what they were signing up for. So we've learnt that importance of a one-to-one initially, talking through what the programme is for, why they're going to be taking part, why they've been identified as someone that could benefit from it. And that initial bit that just softens the blow and starts to build that relationship is really useful. The targeted youth workers that did the programme also recognising the value of one-to-one as part of the offer that we give them. So it's a group work programme with some one-to-one alongside it, because that starts to address some of the individual issues that those young people are facing. We recognised that in one particular group there was quite a broad age group, that was the West Dorset group, and actually we felt that it would be far better to kind of focus on 1 or 2 years together, recognising that wider age group isn't always conducive. And also with our Chesil group, one of the things that we've learned is around avoid working with a single peer group. That was a piece of work that they wanted to work with a group of young people over a longer period of time, and that's been a barrier in terms of bringing new people into that group and widening the offer to different schools, etc. In terms of the wider learning, so one of the things that's come from our Pineapple project, our Hidden Girls project, is we really are recognising the need to find non-traditional partners to provide safe spaces to young women. So that includes things like retailers, transport providers, coffee shops, etc. And we've started to proactively approach individual businesses within the Weymouth town centre area, and we're offering them training and support on an ongoing basis for their staff to be a safe space. And we just launched the publicity. I'll try and track down the link to the publicity so you can see that. But one of the things that we're looking at is a little discreet pineapple logo that somebody wears as a lapel or is displayed as a small sticker in a shop window, so that young women, if they feel unsafe, are able to approach somebody in that and know that somebody there is trained and able to support them. And then again, the longer term piece of work that I mentioned earlier about the need to engage or to undertake single gender work. So a lot of the sexual health and relationships work that's done in schools is now done jointly, recognising the need to talk to young men about their behaviour, about sensible conversations about consent and understanding some of that, but also for young women to have a space in which they can disclose and discuss some of those things that they don't necessarily feel able to do in mixed gender groups. Okay, so in terms of our next steps, so we're working up what we're calling a community guardianship model. So that's, again, sort of expanding on that pineapple work, recognizing that if we're going to have safe communities and we're going to have space in which young women are safe from sexual violence, then actually safeguarding is everybody's responsibility. So getting businesses engaged, getting landowners involved, getting shopkeepers and retail staff involved is as important as the presence of increased police officers and detached and outreach work to those areas that we are concerned about, because we can't be everywhere all of the time. So it is about everybody recognising the responsibility to keep our young people safe. Our West Dorset programme, we are expanding our peer mentoring programme. We're developing a peer mentoring programme, so working with the group that went through the first cohort and trying to match those up with some other young people that are now at emerging risk, and using the bushcraft skills as a tool to do that. And with our North Dorset group, we are continuing to see them on a monthly basis through school drop-ins, and continue to engage that group on through detached and outreach youth work. So that concludes me, and I'm going to hand over to my colleagues in Swindon, who I'm hoping are ready to take the baton.
Oh yes, I'm here. Okay, I hope I've taken control now.
Yes, you have.
Okay. Okay, so let me move on. Okay, problem here. Is that moved on for people? Oh, it is. Right, I don't want all that to come up. Can everybody see just the PowerPoint? You cannot see my notes, can you?
No, Jeanette, it's just the PowerPoint.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so my name's Jeanette Chippin. I'm the Child Exploitation and Missing Children's Manager at Swindon Borough Council. The good news is I've got a colleague on the line with me as well. Cool. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep, hi, yep, I'm Jo Cavell from Swindon Parenting Hub.
She's been pulled in at lastminute.com, but thanks, Joe. Always feels a little bit kind of strange after all of that wonderful stuff that's gone on to now say, and in Swindon we're doing this, but I'll try to keep it focused and let you know what we're up to. So like everybody else, Swindon is working in a contextual safeguarding framework. We're part of the network. We have various processes in place. I'm not going to go into that very much. We do have a multi-agency risk panel which looks at our high-risk children, and we are piloting a risk outside the home model, which actually isn't, these children will not be part of the child protection process. That's all work in progress, but just to give a kind of context of Swindon is that we are definitely working in a contextual safeguarding framework. Okay, did that work? That didn't work, did it? It had to go wrong at some point, didn't it? Oh, here we go. So we did a number of different projects in Swindon, which I'm going to kind of whiz through. So the first one of our projects was around a father's mentoring fitness group. And what we have in Swindon is something called iProofit, who does a lot of mentoring work with children in Swindon. And one of the areas they identified is that the children, mainly the boys, were identifying their relationship with their fathers as being an issue. It was a big issue for some of the children, and iProofit were having conversations with us around what we could do to move that forward and try to rebuild some of those relationships. So we put together this remit. So it was around fathers of children being a risk of exploitation or being. And we actually then started to sort of think about how we could put that together. We actually did have a lot of learning in this process because, again, just like other people have said, is we thought, oh, right, we'll put out a few flyers, we'll let people know about it and we'll be inundated. That didn't happen. And one of the big things that actually was a learning is that it was a real challenge to get referrals in the beginning, because often with this group of children, fathers are not actively involved in their life. And that can be for a whole number of reasons, but it was something that was really, really important for us to actually look at and think about, in the sense of the work we do with fathers, often sometimes we're not actually encouraging them to be part of children's lives, or they feel that they haven't got a role. So very much around there was very much around the fathers needed to be encouraged, and we got some really great feedback from one of the fathers, is that he actually couldn't praise the scheme enough. He's finding that it's helping with his mental health, not just the exercise, but the support, openness and guidance given is having a real impact. And what we tried to do was to actually think of a different way, a creative way of engaging the dad, and the physical exercise was really, really important to that group of fathers. We had 4 fathers in the end that attended. Oh, I'm having technical issues. All right, so the learning that has been found is that it gave an insight into the barriers of fatherhood, appreciating the father's efforts and affirming their importance to the family dynamic, especially when there was co-parenting or friction within that family dynamic. Fathers said that they tended to back off. And then they had in kind of really quite challenging discussions sometimes in the improvements that they could make as fathers, how important that they were seen to be present for their children, and that, you know, how to communicate effectively with their children. Nutrition was a big thing, and the importance of a balanced lifestyle around mood and their energy levels. And discussions on the guidance of dealing with children who had specific needs. There was a father whose child had ADHD that he felt that he got in conflict with the child rather than actually trying to support the child. So a lot of work was spent time helping him to talk about that, and that the physical exercise was a really important way of bringing the dads together. And the importance of role modelling for those children, for those parents, by the trainers. Now, the iProofit has been set up by an ex-Swindon Town football player, and most of them have got, and Jarell and Danny have both got lots of sort of experience in this area, and it was a really, really important way of them role modelling what was going on. So we had one of the fathers actually said it had improved his relationship with his child by 100%, and it made him look at his child in a different way and try to understand what was going on for them. We extended the referrals out to the family nurse partnership. So we did have a young dad on in the group who actually had been part of a gang himself, and he actually wanted to attend because he wanted to try to understand things better and build his relationship with his young child. The second group that we did, this is all around working with parents, is that we had a group called they called themselves the Village Circle, because it takes a village to raise a child, and this is so true, and they felt it was a warmer word or description of the group rather than just a group. And what was really, really important is that it was mainly parents whose children were already on the edges or involved in the criminal justice service, but they were all parents whose children had been exploited as well, and they came along to the group to actually talk, and it was they actually put this PowerPoint together themselves. So this is what they actually did. This is how parents felt prior to coming to the group. They felt very alone. They felt very judged. They felt persecuted, and one parent shared how their child at 16 had committed a serious offence, and she was devastated by that. It took 2 years for it to actually come to court, and the group started around the time he was going through the court process. Because he was 18, it was all over the papers, and this parent said she was hiding in the house with her 14-year-old son when it hit the papers, and the only place she was going out to was this group, because she actually felt that there were people in the group that actually could support her and did not judge her. Moving on. So this is what the people as in the group, the women in the group actually said, was that the group benefits were, I won't go into all of those, but I think it's about that safe space. What was interesting is we're calling it a parenting group, but it's turned into a group for women who are parents, and it was really important by the end of it that we actually then recognised it needed to be a safe space for women as parents, because actually majority of the parents attending that group did disclose that they'd either been victims of domestic violence themselves or sexual assault. Need to move my oh, have I gone too far now? Oh no, we're there. Okay, so one of the things that we actually did was actually also alongside that we felt we needed to do more work with parents, so we commissioned Parents Against Child Exploitation, but we actually did it an online webinar for parents, so that we could actually work with those parents. I'm struggling with the technology. We actually it was a fantastic. We'd actually tried to go into schools and face-to-face prior COVID, and we actually had a very few number of parents taking up our offer. However, when we put it online, we actually had 115 parents attended at the training session with parents, the first training session, and 61 the second session, which was absolutely amazing. What we feel is online helped on one level, and also the fact that it wasn't just Swindon Borough Council who were advertising this, it was also PACE and Barnardo's, because it was a joint facilitated with Barnardo's as well as myself and Wiltshire Police. So it was a kind of quite an astounding response. Jackie, could you take control? I'm having problems moving something around. Oh, it's all right. I think I'm all right now. Oh, yeah, Jackie, are you there? Help.
Sorry, just you. Okay, you've taken it off the screen. Hold on.
I'm just going to share again.
Okay, is it back on? I do apologise. Technology and me. I will carry on talking as we're talking. So there were so in those parents, 100% of the parents actually said that they would recognise the webinar to other parents. 98% of the parents felt more confident to talk to their children about child exploitation, and 100% of the parents felt their knowledge and understanding about child exploitation had improved. Next slide then, Jackie, please. Thank you. So one of the parents, if you go back one, the parent said, I felt that something had just clicked. It feels real and not just an issue that happens to others. There was such an amazing session. Have some clarity on issues I have had with my child. Thank you very much. And it made me think about viewing this from the child's point of view and what is and isn't safe, not just adults' views. So that was Parents Against Child Exploitation, and that was a really successful seminar that people joined. I suppose the learning from that was almost like, what about those parents that didn't have access to technology? And should we be, you know, how do we reach those parents? So that is something we'll be reflecting on moving forward. Next slide, Jackie, please. This was an exciting pilot that we did. So based on the family group conference model, we started to have community conversations, and the community conversations was an important way of actually looking at what the issues are within the communities that people are living. So we wanted to have a community-led problem-solving model, and we seconded a coordinator from the family group conference team into taking this forward. And it was about moving away from supporting individual children to supporting peer groups or incidents that took place in the community. And we brought community professionals and key parents together who were also kind of community members, to discuss what the issues were, and staying safe, identifying issues within the community and making a plan of how we can reduce these risks was actually key to these community conversations. Next slide, Jackie, please. So over 6 months, the coordinator facilitated 5 community conversations. 1 was with a volunteer community group, 3 within schools, and 1 was within a youth provision. And the overall attendance at these conferences were approximately 80 people. And it was really the youth provision, which is one I'll kind of drill down on a bit before, had about 40 children attend and they talked about what made them feel safe, what they'd like to see. And one of the initiate things that came out of it was that they'd been beginning to talk about trying to do something around raising money and looking at a kind of an enterprise within the community. And one of the things that kind of got crystallized in that session was that they were setting up a pizza business, I put in very inverted commas, where they would be and we helped them to purchase a pizza oven where they were going out to community events and selling pizzas to make the money. So that was kind of something very simple that came out of these community conversations, but it really helped us to look at what people in the community wanted to look and feel safe about. And we based we gave them some knowledge. If you go to the next slide, Jackie, please, on talking to we can move on from that one. I think we don't need to go through the process. Talking to 114 children. So part of this scheme, 114 children were met and discussed and filled in questionnaires around what they actually made them feel safe in the community or unsafe in the community. And those were the key questions that were asked. And it was really quite a worry of the number of children that actually were saying that they wanted, that they actually were concerned about the crime in the area, and that they were worried, 95% around what was going on in their area, and they actually wanted more security cameras. They talked about wanting more buses, etc. So that there was a real concern from this group of children. They were from age year 9 up to 12, and there was a real concern is that the strong theme was that the large majority of the children were feeling unsafe in the area where they lived. Now, we had a really good conversation with the group around that, and some of that was actually about what they were seeing in the media and what was being portrayed in the media. And one of the things that kind of the children talked about was actually seeing sort of knives and stuff like that kind of portrayed in pictures online and the local paper of the police with big knives when they had the knife amnesty and things like that. So children were wanting to kind of feel safer in their community, but some of it was around that there was these fears around that everybody was carrying a knife, etc. And it was really important to try to actually recognise their concerns, but also put a social norm about what was going on, because we know that majority of children are not carrying knives in our communities, and so it was important to begin to talk to children, and those conversations are ongoing within that youth group and within the schools that we worked with. If you go to the next slide then, Jackie, please. So the challenges around this was it really took a long time. This is a new way of working to get people to understand the process and to get on board. It took several months of really talking, going back to people, having the conversations. And we did have some of the conferences where there was a disappointing kind of turnout. That one of those was within the secondary school. It was online. We were expecting more people, and they were all evening, and people didn't arrive. And another one was within a primary school where one parent actually, or two parents actually, said they didn't come along because it was advertised in the way that it was around exploitation, and they were concerned about the if they were seen coming to the school, the impact that may be on people in the community that they were scared about. So that was picked up by the local police, and those discussions were ongoing with those two parents. They didn't come, but we made contact through the school with them. So that was something that was quite, again, was that perceived? Was that a real threat, or was that just the fear that those parents were feeling, and then the impact of that on their children, on their day-to-day lives? Moving on, Jackie. I realise that time is going. Children identified the lack of youth service that was available to them in the sessions, and so did the parents. We're going to do reviews of the community's plans in the sense of you speak, we listen, making sure we actually done what we said we would. There is kind of more requests moving forward for wanting these community conversations. The kind of very positive engagement, the children's feedback about the session was really, really, really positive, and children were able to talk about positive relationships they had with their social workers, and that got fed back as well. And it raised awareness around child exploitation, safety planning, and better understanding of the safeguarding, reporting and referral process. And one of the things that has come out of this is that it went to our senior management team within Swindon Borough Council, and a business case is being put forward and likely to be agreed for this to be a permanent post within the family safeguarding model. Moving on, Jackie. Right, so this is where Joe comes in. So we actually did some work around with the Youth Justice Service around, similar to what happened in Wiltshire, around meeting children when they were arrested. But first I'm going to pull over to Joe around the parenting worker in the youth court session. Could you move on 2 slides, Jackie, I think? Yeah, Joe, do you want to just say a little bit about what you did within?
Yep, we'll do. Sorry, just making sure that slide isn't applicable to me.
Yeah, I think that was the feedback your parents gave.
Oh, right. Okay, excellent. Right, so that was from the trial, I believe. Right, so as you said, my name is Jo Cavell from Swindon Parenting Hub. We work with parents of 0 to 18-year-old children and young people, offering group work, a number of programs and one-to-one support. So about this time last year, we were approached by the Youth Justice Service to run a trial, and the premise was that a parenting practitioner would attend youth court, which runs once a fortnight, and it was aimed at sort of capitalising on those reachable, teachable moments that were mentioned earlier. And the idea would go, when a young person ends up in court, that a parenting practitioner would go to court and normally the young people are accompanied by their parent, and once they've been through the court process, we would approach the parents and carefully offer them some support. That support would generally be one-to-one support for that parent, but it would be bespoke to their situation depending on what they needed. So during that trial, which was initially 6 weeks, but it was extended so that we could include 6 court sessions, the number of the take-up was averaged out at 1 parent per court session. So we picked up 6 parents for some long-term support from those 6 weeks. And we, depending on the parents' needs, depending on how long we work with them. So once those bits of support had continued, had completed, we got some really positive feedback. Parents are reporting improved relationships and communication with their teenagers, really appreciating having a non-judgmental, empathetic ear, and finding out nuggets of information that really made a difference to their whole families, not just the relationship between them and the teenager that had been in court. So following the trial, the scheme was sort of restarted in February with 2 parenting practitioners attending court sort of alternately. Feedback has continued to be positive, and the take-up has increased slightly as well. So we're working with a few more parents on average per session. So that's been really positive. Yeah.
Cheers. Thank you, Jo. Jackie, could you go back 1 slide then, please? So we have also got the Engage project is the targeting children that are actually in custody, and that has been positive. So it's done the early identification of exploitation with those children, and which is improved national referral mechanisms being processed, and children being picked up when there's been child protection issues, which has been a really important part of that work. This work is going to be mainstreamed, and we are in conversations with Nelson's Trust and liaison with the diversion services, liaison and diversion services. So that has been something that's been really kind of important with that work. And there's been 10 children to date that the pilot has actually worked with, and as there's been early disclosures of that group of children. So again, that is something that is going to be mainstream moving forward. We've just been told that will be happening, so that is really positive. Moving on, Jackie. Move on again, and then lastly, we've actually got the Starting Point mentoring service, which was kind of quite late to the table. If the project hadn't been extended, we wouldn't have been able to do this, but we've paid for the training of these of new mentors for this programme. But it's actually around offering targeting 15 and 16-year-olds in our out of other than education service, trying to actually target those children, especially those that are likely to be NEET. The positives of this programme is that we've actually got a partnership with the Police and Crime Commissioner, so this will definitely continue for at least another year. That was the agreement with the joint funding that went through. So we do know also that Starting Point will not stop working with children once they have reached 17. They will carry on doing that, because they've also got a programme in Swindon that is actually for 18 to 25-year-olds. So they will stay with this young person for as long as they are needed. The mentor, the volunteer mentor, will continue along the journey with the child for a young person when they move into young adulthood for as long as what that is needed for them. And the positives around that is that there's a very tailored matching system that goes on with the young person, and that they try to aspire to shared interest and some lived experience, if possible, around that targeted approach. Next slide, Jackie. So lastly, we also facilitated training for professionals. We had the Out of the Shadows Kendra Houseman, which was a very kind of impactful session. 103 professionals attended the training. You can see that one of the things that, like Dorset, that we're wanting to target a bit more is around females being exploited, the role of females in gangs, the fact that the invisible bit of females within gangs, but also the overrepresentation, the fact that boys are not actually seen as being sexually exploited within the gang system. So this was a very impactful training, and we were lucky to get 103 people in the 2 training sessions, and the feedback was so good that actually Education are going to be commissioning it for across the schools in Swindon, and also I know that the Wiltshire Police are wanting to mainstream it across their training as well if they can get the funding for it. The impact has been great, and people are still talking about it. Next slide, Jackie. So looking at the kind of looking at the kind of their knowledge before. I just looking at that didn't look good until I read it. Looking before, what their knowledge was and how they felt after, and kind of just seeing how that good to excellent is just quite amazing from a training course. And that's some of the feedback you'll get in these slides, so I'll leave you to actually read that yourself. But the best tracing up, I know kind of various people that I was surprised at how positive their feedback was, because they're very hard to please. Moving on. And then we've got Jackie's role. Jackie, would you like to say a little bit about your role before we close? Because I think we're almost running out of time.
Just to say that I was helping Jeanette for about 6 months, I think it probably was, with this piece of work. So it was a part-time post for 18 hours. And the kind of main focus was about developing resources for frontline professionals. So getting a shared kind of common understanding about risk outside the home, what adopting a contextual safeguarding approach means. So part of that work was developing a web page on our Safeguarding Partnership website, a number of briefing resources, particularly focusing on use of language when we're kind of when professionals are working with children, young people and their families. I think that was a really kind of positive piece of work, which has received quite good feedback. Again, linking in, starting kind of some work with linking in. So we linked in with the our shopping outlet centre. Very nice if you're ever in Swindon. So just there to make those links, certainly kind of when it was the child exploitation awareness session, so with some of the actual premises. So we had some initial engagement with them and linking in with some of our local bus companies. There's still a bit more work to be done, but it was kind of starting that conversation and awareness raising, and then delivering the Roth training to a number of professionals. And again, I think, as Jeanette's touched on, there's still some more work to do with that across our partnership. So that was about it, really. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. I think I'm now handing over, it's the next slide, Jackie. I'm handing over back to Dorset.
Thank you. Thank you to all the presenters. I'm sure everybody found those insights and your experiences and the learning that you've gotten from all of those projects really, really interesting. But I just wanted to open the floor really to questions. I've been keeping an eye on the chat, and I know that I think, Lisa, you've already responded to one of the questions that came through from Sarah Marriott about the tool that Wiltshire you described at the beginning. Was there anything you wanted to come in on verbally, Lisa, around that tool particularly?
Yeah, although I better just check I got the right end of the stick, actually. I don't know if Sarah's still on the line. In terms of the tool, Sarah, was it the parent mentoring pilot that you were referring to or something? Or was
yes,
it
yeah, it was, yeah.
I thought so, yeah, I was getting confused. Yeah, so just to clarify, so we have been doing this parent mentor program on quite a small scale, specifically thinking about exploitation, then we're trying to make it a bit wider. But as you'll probably be aware, at the same time in Wiltshire, we have got our family-led review of child protection. Kind of the review is completed, and we've got a lot of work implementing a family advisory board where parents are kind of being part of that process, and there's some other work going on around advocating. So as I mentioned in the reply, we're sort of linking in with that to kind of see where the bits are going, and then it might come to the point where the kind of parent mentor model is adapted, or we take on some of the learning from the family advisory board as well. But you definitely want to make sure it's linked up so that the offers across all parents, not just those that are kind of children are at risk of being exploited. But yeah, I hope that was clear and I've answered that.
Brilliant, thank you, Lisa. If anybody has got any questions, you're very welcome to put them in the chat and we can respond to them either now, or we'll pick them up and follow them up after this event ends. Otherwise, if you wanted to put your hand up, you're very welcome to ask a question, put your camera on and ask any of our presenters today. I think we might have stunned you all into silence with how much. Oh, Prue, would you like to come in?
Hello, yeah, I did just put it in the chat actually.
Oh, sorry.
So no, please don't worry. It's just because everyone gets really busy at this time, don't they? And lots of comments come in.
Yes.
Really, really thought-provoking, some amazing work. I'm from Dorset. I'm just really interested. I'm a team manager in children who are disabled in Dorset. So we have a lot of children, particularly with high functioning autism, as well as profound autism, so associated learning disabilities, and their parents. You know, I think there is a lot more awareness coming about autism. We're getting a lot of late diagnoses. So a lot of these adolescents, they get to 13, 14, and they're getting very late diagnosis of autism. So we have to consider this within our working. We have so many times where we're applying our social work, we're applying our work, and many times as a disability team manager, we're asked by parents, where's the specialism in autism? Is there specific skills in autism? Is that practitioner coming to me to help me? How skilled are they in autism? So it's really just to, I guess, wave the flag for that, if you like, because I think in all of this fantastic work, we must consider those young people. And also parents, we're getting a lot more parents who are recognising those late diagnoses of their children, and we're encouraging parents to go and get an adult assessment of autism. So again, it's going to become more and more prevalent. So it's really just to raise that flag and just to say, particularly in this area of work, I think it's really, really relevant.
Thanks, Prue. Yeah, absolutely. Really valuable to raise that in this forum and for us to all consider that. Simon, do you want to come in?
Yeah, so Prue, it's a strange thing because obviously we're colleagues in the same local authority, but I suspect that lots of local authorities will be getting to grips with the risk of young people with autism at risk of exploitation. So not a bad conversation to have out in the open.
Yeah.
I'm going to cheat a little bit and say I think we want to work with you for you to help us to do better with our children and young people with autism. It's interesting because I've just done this week. I've been doing a bit of work around our monthly missing report and the number of return home interviews that have not been taken up, and the correlation between those with autistic spectrum disorder and parents reluctant to allow a new professional in to carry out that return home interview because that is not something that young person is able to cope with. But from my perspective, looking at that, thinking, I wonder if there's a missed opportunity around a young person that is potentially at risk because of that missing episode, and what work could we have done to put in place a plan for if that young person decides that they can't cope with it and they're going to storm out again, and that parent
absolutely.
So I think there's certainly work around missing and return home interviews and those episodes, but equally, I think some of the risk around online grooming is equally there around young people with autistic spectrum disorder and so on. So I think there's
list, Simon. There's a shopping list. Yeah, I know that one of the issues is young people, when they become very dysregulated at home, you get the police involved, and these young people end up in police cells. That is not a good way for these young people. So yes, there is massive work.
But there will be also, I think someone will have done some resources out there, and we've got networks around exploitation and so on. So there will be resources out there, and I think if people do know, I might really encourage them to share or point us in the right direction. But you haven't. I'm sure you've highlighted something that lots of local authorities are grappling with.
Thank you very much, Joe. You've got your hand up. Is that on the same area?
Yes, just to say, Simon and Prue, completely agree with you that the autism and ADHD and those types of traits are quite prevalent amongst the children and young people who are being exploited. It doesn't obviously happen in Help Dorset, but in Swindon we have our Managing Challenging Behaviour Teens programme, and the facilitators who deliver that and who do the one-to-one work with the parents from Youth Court are trained in that, and that is specifically to help with strategies for those children, whether they got a diagnosis or not, the strategies that will help those parents deal with their traits of autism, ADHD, trauma and attachment. So yeah,
there's not a link you could put in, Joe, is there? Because I'd be really interested to explore that a little, because parents are always asking for specific courses, and you've got your standard that everybody churns out. Most of them for autism are aimed at the younger children, so anything, I'm more than, I'm all ears, so anything would be really, really appreciated.
I think our programme is probably only available in Swindon, but I'll have a dig and see if there's anything that I can send you that would be helpful.
Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thank you. Thanks for that. I've got Vanessa with the next hand up. Would you like to ask a question to anyone in particular?
No, just some advice really. We've had obviously I work with a specialist school for SEN children in Wiltshire, and we've had a few children that's been sort of vulnerable enough to be sort of online grooming with explicit pictures, and we've been through the police and things, and there's not really a lot of support from them. We've tried the Emerald team, but again, I'm not quite sure of the criteria. So is this another avenue we can go with the parents rather than having to go through Emerald to get the support, or do we have to go through those first?
I might ask Lisa to come in and answer this one.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, Vanessa. It might be if you want to kind of message me outside of this to talk about the specific issues. The Emerald team are kind of the first point of call for offering advice and resources, but the threshold for actually being open to the team is sort of high. There has to be kind of demonstrable exploitation and extra familial harm. But I'm happy to kind of pick up on that after. If we do have a lot of resources that we can share, and there is some support available. But I'm happy to kind of pick up on that. I'm getting terrible feedback. I don't know if anyone else can hear that. That we can share, and there is some support available.
Lovely, thank you.
Okay, terrible feedback. I don't know if anyone else can hear that.
Okay, that's brilliant. Thank you. If everybody can mute again, if they're not speaking, that would probably might help as well. Thank you. Holly, you've got your hand up. Is that coming in on the same area?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly say that, yeah, that's something, Prue, that we've noticed. So one of our parents, her son got diagnosed with autism at age 16, and then mum actually went for a assessment and actually is autistic as well. And actually talking to them when on my initial sort of parent mentor meeting, mum was very much like feeling that people didn't understand her, and in meetings feeling like almost to the point where she was sort of saying that there wasn't any point in her engaged or speaking out and things because and she was saying that people took her the wrong way, but she recognized she's very black and white. And yeah, so I definitely think there's something around that. And for the young person as well, you know, with was involved in exploitation and things like that, but the sort of autism's maybe missing from that support. But yeah, so I just wanted to pick up on that really.
Brilliant, thanks, Holly. Any other questions that we can answer for today? I think on the slide deck, the final slide has got everybody's email addresses of the presenters that have spoken today. So if you want to follow up and have any specific questions about the projects that people have undertaken, I'm sure they'd be all very, very happy to have a conversation with you and share any of the learning in different ways as well. So they're on there for you. I think I'm handing back to Jeanette, aren't I?
You are. You are. So I get the privilege of ending this session from the 3 local authorities, and I think it's really great how we've all worked together, Wiltshire, Dorset and Swindon, around these areas, and I think the coming together has actually helped us to kind of learn more about each other, which has been really, really good. We've heard about a whole range of new creative ways of moving forward with this group of children, young people, and the important role, which we can't underestimate, of parents and carers in this. They need to be our partners in this work moving forward, and we need to actually continue to be creative. The present systems, as we know through the contextual safeguarding work, is not, child protection systems do not work for this, for teenagers, full stop, and even less for this group of children. And what we need to do is move from the criminal justice way of managing this to a much more welfare model. So a wide range. I hope you've taken something away from this session. We do ask that you actually fill in the evaluation form, which Jackie has already put in the chat. And if there are no further questions, we will actually close the session. I think I covered everything I was supposed to, but please jump in, my colleagues, if I haven't.
No, I think you have, Jeanette. I think you've done a brilliant job. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for attending and giving up your time to hear about it today. It's been really, really great to have the opportunity to share it with everyone. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Great.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. Brilliant session. Thank you.
Thank you. And you'll get about 8 minutes back, which is always helpful. So please do enjoy.
I could have slowed down.
Yeah, no need to rush. Thanks everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks everyone. Bye.